Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Deborah Crone, professor of early modern cultural history and chair of academic programs here at Bard Graduate Center. And on behalf of our director, Susan Weber, and the associate chair of research programs, Aaron Glass, I'm pleased to welcome you all to this first of the spring's Leon Levy Foundation Lectures in Jewish Material Culture. Here at Bard Graduate Center, we study the human past and cultural history through their material traces and the complex ways in which decorative arts, designed objects, and material culture mediate our own relationships with the past in the present. Our MA and PhD students do this work together with the faculty and fellows, cognizant of our own location and time and space. We are situated in 3 landmark buildings on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, in the heart of Lenape-Hoking, the ancestral territories of the Lenni Lenape people, 1 block away from the former site of Seneca Village, a community of African American and immigrant property owners that was forcibly relocated to create Central Park, in a neighborhood and a city long comprised of global migrants and refugees from war, from violence and economic dislocation. We gather tonight to hear about Jewish material culture at a precarious moment in Jewish and in human history, a distressing time of war in Israel and in Gaza, as well as Ukraine, not to mention ongoing civil conflict elsewhere in the Middle East and in East Africa, a time of rising anti-Semitic and anti-Islamic sentiment, a time of calls for decolonizing and diversifying our academies, museums, and cultural institutions, a time of global climate crisis. It's precisely at such times that insights from the collective human past, the material traces of prodigious learning and insight, are called on to help guide us out of our own current predicaments into a common human future. As we'll hear tonight, the ability to communicate knowledge of history and to read the book of nature across cultures in the ancient world was an essential element in the creation of many of our foundational texts and institutions. It is in this spirit that we are grateful to the Leon Levy Foundation for funding this lecture series in Jewish material culture, which over the past 6 years has supported distinguished scholars to give 3 related lectures and then to publish with us on topics related to Jewish households, diasporas, and archeologies ranging from the Roman Empire through the medieval Islamicate world to 19th century New York. In these various temporal, spatial, and thematic contexts, I'm honored to introduce this night speaker, Jonathan Ben-Dov, who will address us on his research on text and material culture in ancient Judea. Dr. Ben-Dov is senior lecturer in the Department of Bible at the University of Haifa, where he studies the interconnectedness of ancient cultures. Is that not true? Is that your title is wrong? Tell me what your title actually is. We can. I'll do that. Okay. All right. And make other corrections, please. His work explores biblical literature and the Dead Sea Scrolls, among other forms of Israelite and Jewish literature, in comparison with the cuneiform corpus from Mesopotamia, as well as with Greek and Roman literature. He's also looked at the evidence of knowledge of natural sciences through early Jewish texts dealing with astronomy, astrology, calendars, and medicine, leading to a reevaluation of Jewish sciences a millennium before the emergence of other systems in the Middle Ages, as well as to a new understanding of Jewish mythology. His other area of focus is literacy and writing in the Bible and in Jewish literature, positing models for the development of the early text of the Torah. He has been a research fellow at the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World, just across the park, and the Institute of Advanced Study at Durham University, and has received many other awards and grants, including the prestigious Michael Bruno Award from Yad HaNadiv. He has published widely on calendrical texts, the history of Jewish sciences, and early texts of the Torah. He is currently co-director of German-Israeli project Scripta Qumranica Electronica, which aims to enhance the study of Dead Sea Scrolls using digital humanities methods. The title of this 3-part lecture series is Encounters of Text and Material Culture in Ancient Judea. This evening we'll hear about time machines in text and matter. Please join me in welcoming Jonathan Ben-Dov to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very kind introduction. I am now at Tel Aviv University, so just a about an hour ride in a train. Um, I am very happy and excited to be here. From what I hear from my colleagues here, so Dr. Kirscher, who is my host, and from Deborah and the others, this is really the place to present the kind of research I'm doing here. And actually, I was eager to find audience that would be interested in this encounter between text and material culture. I am a text scholar. If you ask people, what does Ben-Dov do? I do Hebrew Bible, Dead Sea Scrolls, Assyriology, Aramaic texts, all of these things from antiquity. But actually, when the invitation came, I was very happy because I really took it was important for me to go through and look into material culture and connect it with the text that I'm studying. And in this series, there are three different kind of outlooks on this connection between text and material culture. I find that many people in my field do either of the two. So most people in my immediate field would work with texts, would not work so much with material culture. Archaeologists would work a lot with material culture, but would not work very closely with text. And I'm in a series of studies, I try to do both. And this is what I will do today. I am particularly excited to be part of the Leon Levy Foundation lectures because this is really closing a circle for me. I was with the Leon Levy Institute for the Study of the Ancient World in New York about a decade ago, so I'm happy to close the circle. And let's get to the point. Well, time is chaotic, as you know. Time is hard to grasp. Humankind needs to find ways to grasp time because experiencing time is just too chaotic. You need to frame it, you need to tame it, to domesticate it, to place it into frameworks because otherwise time is just immeasurable and uncontrollable for humankind. Therefore, people were looking at ways to do it. They used the heavenly bodies, but they also used other natural phenomena to counter time and to grasp it. So here are some very early examples. I think everybody knows the example you have on the right-hand side. I don't know that much about Stonehenge archaeologically, but I can tell you about that little thing on the left, which is the drawing on the wall of a structure in the Jordan Valley, the eastern side of the Jordan Valley. That's either Chalcolithic or Neolithic, so at least 5,000 years ago, 5 to 10,000 years ago, with a large drawing of a star, multicolored star, which probably attests to some kind of stellar cult or stellar calendar or whatever way these people in the Chalcolithic period in the Jordan Valley next to the Dead Sea, on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, were trying to make sense of the stars and the way they show the time. As you know very well, texts from the Bible have been trying to relate to that. Here is a psalm, a very famous psalm that deals with nature, and it counts all sorts of elements from nature: the trees, the cedars, the birds, the stork, the high mountains for wild goats, the crags, the rock badgers, the moon, the sun. Actually, I'm not very sure this translation is accurate, but we can maybe say something about that later. So the moon and the sun, these are, the natural, I think the most obvious elements for counting time, for measuring time, and for controlling time, and they are counted here next to other cultural phenomena like the rock badgers and the storks and so on. And this was really part of the author's mode of capturing the world. So when we say time, time could lead us to many different concepts. When we say the word time, time could lead us to ritual or to ornamental or to quotidian time or to the very beginning of time at creation, or to a very precise scientific count of time, or to political time. I will try to give some examples for these things. This is just as an introduction to the two case studies that I'm going to present. Did you ever consider that China has only one time zone? I think it's, and these are, I mean, if it had more than one, if it acted by the natural time zones, then it would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 time zones. But it's a political statement on the part of the Chinese government to make it just one time zone, which means that if you live in the east of China, the way you regulate your sun dawn, the dawn and dusk, that would be a problem. But time has always been a political statement on the part of various rulers. Look at this Ottoman. It turns out that the Ottoman Empire was building clock towers throughout the empire. There's a nice one in Jaffa, next to Tel Aviv, where I teach. But there are many others. A colleague of mine in Tel Aviv University wrote a beautiful monograph about clock towers in the Ottoman Empire. It was a way for the rulers of the empire to make a statement that they control time. It's important. Time is a political statement. In many ways, it is. In many ways. This is all introducing us to, I think, things we will see later on. Here's another political statement, the Greenwich Observatory. Why is that the zero line for time? I'm sure others would contest that. I mean, wouldn't you define another zero line for time? Why Greenwich of all places? I mean, I can see why they chose it, but yes, so that's really a statement about hegemony over time. Time is a very important component of ritual. In Pompeii, on the Temple of Apollo, there was a sundial. We'll speak a lot about sundials. This is a very it's a public sundial in the main square, next to the temple, in a very large public square. People looked at it; they could see the time. It's like a watch. Is there still a watch in the Times Square in New York, or there used to be a watch in Times Square? Yes, it's that kind of statement, but this is meant for ritual because it's just next to the temple, and we will return to that because temples are consumers of the precision of time. Rituals are timed and measured, and you have to really be very precise with rituals. And this is a nice example from contemporary Jerusalem, just next to the great market, Machne Yehuda of Jerusalem. There's a very old, not sure of so much functioning sundial. Can you see it at the top of that synagogue over there? Yeah, but it's a statement. It's a statement to have it just next to the synagogue. Of course, time is for administration. Actually, if you ask me what was the first cause for regulating time, for creating a calendar, actually, it was administration, it was tax. It was tax. We have evidence from 4th millennium BCE Egypt for the creation of the Egyptian calendar just in time for the annual cattle censor to pay the tax in ancient Egypt in 3000 so-and-so BCE. The precision of time, atomic clocks, and the luxury of time. Look at the prices down there. Yes. And this is not, it's just a list of what you can find there. I'm sure you can get a bit more. So time could mean many things. What does it mean? What does material time mean? So there is this concept of time that we have in our heads, but time also, when time takes shape of a material object. So what do we make of these material objects who show time and who deal with time, and how do we relate to them? And how does the concept relate to the matter? So what I'll do in this talk is that I will present two case studies, one that I wrote and studied and published and hopefully finished. Maybe I'll get some new ideas, I don't know. The other one is a work in process. So it's the thing I'm presenting here. I'm hoping to get some new ideas as I write it down. That other one needs a bit more research, I admit. But the first one is already done, and that will take you to a very early time. So we are speaking of Judea in the 9th or 8th centuries BCE. just to keep us balanced. So this is the biblical period, the time of the Hebrew Bible. I would say the early Judea kingdom, so not just after King David, but before, the great kings and before the Assyrians came over and so on. The times of maybe King Jehoshaphat or King Ahab in the north. That is more or less the time. And before we enter into what I wanted to present, I just wanted to show you this a lot later Greek object, which is called the parapegma. We call it a parapegma because there are holes in there, and in those holes you should insert pegs. Can you see the holes? This is like a calendar that shows you the seasons of the year, every month of the year, and the weather, so the stars that rise in it and the weather. And so you take a peg and you move the peg one by one month after the other. This is the way parapegmata started. Later on, it just became a literary text. These are later things. This is like later Greek, the Hellenistic. This is 1st century BCE or 2nd, I think, century BCE. But I like the idea of pegs. Yes, taking like a small match, a peg, and move it one day after the other to mark time. And this is the kind of phenomenon we will encounter now. So this is a map of Judea, and the objects I'm going to talk about, all of these are archeological sites in Judea of the biblical period. The Dead Sea on the right hand, the Mediterranean on the left to the west. This is only Judea, so the desert, Negev to the south, leading to Egypt, the Galilee, Samaria and the Galilee over there to the north, but this is Judea. We are really talking about very central places in Judea. So this site, Lachish, I heard, maybe I could point. Can you actually see that? No, you can't. So right in the middle, Lachish, a very central Judean city, very important one. Jerusalem, yes, you see, we will speak about an object from Jerusalem. We will also speak about the site of Gezer, which is on the map here. Okay, not Gaza, but Gezer. We will speak about the site called Tel El Farah South, that's really closer to Egypt, actually, this is the Gaza Strip. Yeah, so this is right on the border of the Gaza Strip. The site in the Negev here in the desert, Aroer. So these are the sites we will speak about, some of the very main sites in Iron Age in biblical Judea. And these are the kind of objects we will discuss in the first test case. So what is this thing? It's a bone. It's made of bone. It's a plaque. It's very small. You will see the scale later on. You can hold it in the palm of your hand. Maybe 5 centimeters long, something like that, like 2 inches long, something like that. And these things that I'm going to talk about today were found, to the best of my knowledge, only in Judea. They were not found in Egypt, not in Assyria, not to the east of the Jordan. These are really clearly Judean objects. Very strange. I couldn't find, and I really worked hard, and I consulted all of the archaeologists I know, but we couldn't find anywhere else that these kinds of objects were found. You can see holes drilled into this object, 3 lines of 10 holes each, right? Yes, that one, there's a mistake. What to do about? Yes, this one, the one on the right has, the left line has 11, which is probably a mistake, but maybe we can explain otherwise. So what do you do with these? First, people thought it's a game board. We have games from biblical Judea, and actually some objects like this one, probably a bit larger, are game boards, but this is not a game board. It's just too small to be a game board. So scholars came up with the idea that actually it's a small desk calendar. Think of a bureaucrat, a clerk sitting at the desk, he or she, I guess at those times, he was sitting at the desk. Remember those days, maybe clerks still have them today, like a desk calendar where you turn the pages. So that was more or less the thing, and take a peg and transform it, move it day by day through the 30 days of the month. So let's see some other examples. This is a bit nicer example. One of the examples found in Lachish, that's a larger site, exactly 10, and you can see, it's nicely carved. It's also a bone plaque, it's also very small, but it's nicer than the older one. you can see also there's some ornaments on the side. If you go all the way to the right, you see like an image from the side. There's some ornaments there. So it's also there is like kind of an element of ornamentation to that little object. Some of these objects were found in tombs. That is, the person, the official, the clerk who used them, they buried his little desk calendar together with him in the tomb. Because it was a case that people took with them to the afterlife. They took their personal, not only this, but also some other personal belongings were buried and taken with them. So they were some of them found in tombs. Look at this one. This is really nicer. Yes. So this is actually the first object found of this series, found at Flinders Petrie, a very famous archaeologist who did most of his career in Egypt, but then he moved for some reason he was kicked out of excavating in Egypt, and he was really one of the starters of biblical archaeology in Palestine of the day. Look at this object from Tel El Far'a, which is ornamental, and even in a way, look at this capital there, it's proto-Iolic. So it's an architectural element. It looks like you can expect a building or pillar in columns in buildings to have this kind of ornament, no matter how small it is, but look at the carving. So these are objects of luxury in some way or another, because in order to carve this kind of thing in bone in such a small size, you will need to work very hard. So some of these people, that was their own little desk calendar, and there was a lot of effort inserted into carving it. And once again, 3 lines of 10 holes each. Now this is the nicest one, and I will like this one particularly, because this one here, look at the left column, or the left row, depends how you hold it. But if you look at the left column, this one has 12 marks in it. Basically, this is a year. Yeah, this thing is a year. So it's got 12 months and 12 months of 30 days each. And you can imagine the pegs going inside and going from one to the other, and so on and so forth. Now, which is also, and again, once again, you see the column, the capital at the top. So that's an ornamental, in a way, it's a luxury object. So it's not it's not gold or silver, but it's in a way, it's an object of personal luxury. And now I'd like to, so when I looked at these things, I was introduced to that by an archaeologist friend. I have one more object to show you. This is the last one to be found, just maybe a decade ago. This one was found in the city of David in Jerusalem. It was found in a debris. There was an old rock-cut pool. The pool was filled up with debris, and there was another layer on top of it. When they dug out the debris in the pool, it turned out the debris came from an office, because they found many seal stamps in that debris. And next to the seal stamps, they found this little thing, which is, it's even smaller than all the others. Look at the scale. Yes. It's even smaller than all the others. And it's a bit different from all the others, as you can see, because all the others had 3 lines of 10, but this one has 3 lines of 5. In that case, one would imagine that for a month, one would need to turn it off, to turn it to the other side, or start pulling the pegs away, or something like that. But this marks half a month. So what do we make of these? What do we make of these? And how did that? And I mean, for me as a Bible scholar, it's important what we can do about this and the text that we actually have in the Bible. Yeah. So this is actually, for me, it's a very interesting encounter of text and image. I'd like to say something about it. But first, there used to be a bottle of water. Here it is. Okay, sorry about that. So, for me, if you look at these three lines, yes, so this really counts for 30-day month. Now, as you know, months are hardly ever, some months could be 30 days, some months in a lunar calendar, some months could be 29 days. And so I guess if a month would be 29, then they would not last to the last, they would maybe not use the last hole. But what we know, and that's interesting, if you go back to here, so there is a schematic year of 30 days, or yeah, 12 times 30 days, 360 days in a schematic year. Let me show you some examples of the way people use a schematic year. So we know there are examples from the ancient Near East, from the cultures around Judea at the time, where people actually use that kind of schematic year, and we can actually see now how they used it and why, and maybe that kind of little object might have used them. Look at this text, for example. So this is a calculation by a clerk from ancient Sumer, from Uma, about 2000 BCE. And this guy needs to make a calculation. How many portions of food do you need for a project that takes an entire year with 36 female workers from Harvest Festival month 1 to month 12? How many days of work? So 360 times 336 workers. So 12, whatever. And this is the amount of. Now, of course, the year in Uma never had exactly 360 days, but the guy needed to plan in advance. So what could you do? I mean, today, you should know, you should understand that we are very lucky to have the Roman calendar that we all use, because we all know in advance just how many days there will be in the next year's whatever year to come. But as long as you use a lunar calendar, you can never know that in advance. Therefore, they needed some kind of scheme. So that was the scheme they used, and yeah, that's good. And I guess these people were using this kind of 30-day holds. Look at this other text, which is very nice. I like it. So this is a petition to the goddess. This is not from Judea. Once again, this is from Mesopotamia, a bit older. So he is a servant. The guy is called Utu, so the dog of the sun god. And he's calling, "O God, my divine mistress Ninciana, accept this prayer, be present in the course of my prayer." He's asking for an oracle answer, and every oracle answer in the ancient world had an expiry date. So you have to define the date you want your oracle. That oracle was valid for exactly 360 days. And look the way he puts it. So establish an oracle of life and well-being for to your servant. Your servant maintain your presence for the sake of the prayer hereby offered from the 20th day of Nisan until the 20th day of Nisan of the coming year, 6 times 60 days, 6 times 60 nights, will to have or not have life and well-being. So this is a kind of he's writing. I could show you in the cuneiform. He's writing these numbers. This is a very nice way to write now. It's like a festive. He could have written just 360, but this is a very festive way of writing the numbers. So he made a fuss of it. It was a big thing. Yeah. So these schematic months of 30 days, they were playing a part in the Mesopotamian year, and I'm thinking that this might have been done also in biblical times. So, for example, one example, I think a nice one, but I actually this is the nicest one for scholars. There's a very good one that works well with dates in the Pentateuch. But for example, we'll first look at this one from the Scroll of Esther. So when each girl's turn came to the king Ahasuerus at the end of the 12 months, treatment prescribed for women. For that was the period spent on beautifying them 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. So Esther was brought to the king, and she was there for 6 months of that kind of cosmetics and 6 months of that other kind. So why exactly 6 and 6? Yes, or why exactly 12 months? So I think the answer comes from this Greek source about the life of Artaxerxes. Not sure this is Ahasuerus, the historical one, but who knows? As there was a Tosa whom the king passionately loved and had made his wife contrary to the law, and he kept 360 concubines who were of unsurpassing beauty, That means the king, according to that Greek source, the king had 360 women. Apparently, one woman for every day of the calendar, but that was for the schematic, yes, for the kind of schematic. What did he do if the year had only 354 days? That would be a problem. Or if the year, or if an intercalated year of 384, I guess there would be a problem in the Persian harem. However, this is evidence for mention of the schematic, 12 times 30 days. in the Hebrew Bible. And in the article that I published, I showed that some of the dates in the Hebrew Bible actually work very well. And more precisely, I could say that the priestly writers in the Torah, in the Pentateuch, priestly writers in the Pentateuch, scholars often say the priestly writers in the Pentateuch, they have the character of administrators. Because think about it, priests were not only concerned with sacrifices, priests were also concerned with administration. They had, the temple was a big economic business. There was a lot of money involved in the temple, a lot of animals, and a lot of donations, and a lot of spending. And they needed, so priests were also very well trained. And the priestly authors in the Torah, in the Pentateuch, you can see that they are naming very precise dates, and they are very happy with numbers and very happy with categories and different kinds and so on and so forth. And Professor Feldman here will tell you more about that. Very happy you came. So what I did in that article is connecting these objects, that small objects were found in Judea, with that calendar. But, and here's the sensation. Think about it. They are not using 7-day units. So, yeah, I mean, it's the Bible after all, what? And we would expect them to use weeks, because weeks is like the most typical Judean. But look at that, look. Yes, they are counting decades. Actually, in ancient Egypt, the week consisted of 10 days. They counted time by decades. So they would say, in the month of so and so, in the second decade, day 3 of the second decade, something like that. That was the time in ancient Egypt. And the text and this object in Judea probably attests to that kind of time reckoning, and not to weeks. So they did not count time with Sabbath. So they never used the terms like Sunday, Monday, whatever. In Hebrew, these are not names of Viking gods, but rather they are names of numbers. Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, yeah, first day, second day, third day. But neither of these are used in these objects, which means that administrators in early Judea, when they counted their time, they did not use the Sabbath as a unit for counting time, which is interesting, but maybe if you think about it, not very surprising. The Sabbath is, well, a holy unit, it's a unit of sacred time. But when did people actually start using the Sabbath, or the weeks, the days of the week, for marking time? Like writing contracts. Today in a contract you would say Monday, the 3rd of June, or whatever. When did that even start? So thinking about it, this is our first attested use of the week as an administrative unit. Can you see anything? Yeah, well, I admit that's a bit problematic, but it's a 1st century BCE ostrakon, so it's a piece of pottery on which small like documents were written. And this is the first one when the week is, the first one we know when the week is used as a civil unit. This looks a bit nicer. This is an ostrakon from Masada, so 1st century CE. I like this one very much. Some of you might be able to read it. Could you try? Anyway, it says, Yehosef the baker, to Yehuda son of Haggai, 1 challah every week. Shuba. Okay? Challah, chada, bechol shuba. Shuba, that's the Aramaic word for week. And these are one of the earliest attestations of using the week for counting time. Which is not present in those a lot earlier, a millennium earlier, small bone plaques where the Sabbath was not used for administrative time reckoning. Interesting and important for us, yes. So this concludes my first test case of objects and texts. I'd like to move to my second. And what am I doing with, how am I doing with time? Actually, I didn't. No. I like asking the question. It's a way. I always do that in this kind of lecture. Okay. This is a second test case. We are jumping for, I see there's a question, but maybe we will take all questions at the end if you don't mind. So we're jumping about a millennium in time to Roman Judea, so maybe 800 years. The first century BCE, the first century CE, we are really talking about sundials. This is the book that started my interest in sundials. Amazing, an amazing book. If you have any kind of interest in time, just have a look at this. This is remember what I saw, the luxury Swiss wristwatches I saw it at the beginning. This is the luxury thing of the Roman Empire. People had small portable sundials that you could adjust to any latitude throughout the empire. And people, you could use this kind of luxury item to show you the time, yes, the precise time in any part of the empire. The empire in the palm of your hand. These are beautiful objects, very well crafted objects, very accurate, nicely done objects. They convey a message of preciseness, but they also convey a political message of mastery. It was important for Roman emperors to show that part of mastering the empire was also mastering time. Think about it, all the reforms in time done by the Roman emperors and so on. So that gave an inspiration for my study. The objects we will study from Judea are not as nice and not as elaborate as this one, but they're interesting nevertheless. Whatever I present, the first slides I present here are taken from this fabulous book published across the street at the Institute of the Ancient World. And here is one of the nice things they have there. It's taken from Roman Anatolia. There's a sundial in the city square, and the guy is saying, "Oh, damn it, I missed supper." Yes, he looks at sundial. He says, "It's too late. I missed Sunday. I missed supper." Yeah. So the later Roman Empire was really obsessed with hours. You should know that in the hours, the point of counting, dividing the day into 12 and counting the hours, think about it. When did that come through? Actually, I'm involved in a project, it might be nice to tell you about. So in a project that's writing the history of the 12-hour day. I can tell you it was practiced in Egypt for millennia before, but it only entered really in good uses in the East in these years, the Roman Empire, the first century BCE, more or less. This is the time when hours started to be counted in normal everyday usage. Before that, people just said in the afternoon or, at midnight. But nobody ever used the third hour or, fourth hour and so on. The Roman Empire is really the time when hours are beginning into use. So in Roman sundials, in the Roman Empire, sundials has become a luxury item. And so you see that the iconography of sundials is often connected with gods or mythological figures connected with time. So Atlas, the giant, carrying the globe. And what kind of globe is he carrying on the right-hand side? Of course, he's carrying the celestial sphere. He's not carrying Earth. He's carrying the celestial sphere on his back. And here's another goddess of time. Can we read? I think the writing didn't come out well. So sundials were connected with gods, deities of time in the Roman Empire. But here is a nice quote that's saying, look, Roman empires, Roman sundials were often not so much about precision. The idea was that have them, in some ways it reminds me of like a garden gnome that people have in their gardens. So it's a nice thing for decoration. It looks very nice. It's very, fancy to have a sundial in your yard. But for example, this is a sundial taken from Catania in Greek Sicily and placed in Rome. And it's absolutely not accurate. It's just there for the ornament. These are sundials in the Roman Empire. Look at this nice object. This was found in a burnt house in Egypt. A house belonged to a priest in Tanis in northern Egypt in the first century BC, just at the time of Cleopatra, more or less. Yes, it's a sundial. It belonged to a priest, a Greek priest in Egypt in the 1st century BCE. That's a very small sundial. I did not bring the size, but the size is actually, you can hold it in the palm of your hand. So it's like 2 inches long. That's it. It's made of ivory. It was found in fragments because it was burnt, and then they put together the fragments and placed it, and it's now in the British Museum. But it's very accurate. So the mathematicians who do that, they can tell you that this is a very accurate sundial that was anchored to a wall facing the sun to the south, and it showed the time for the priest in the temple. Why would the priest need a sundial? Because rituals are anchored to time. If you miss the time, if you do the ritual an hour later than the time that it's used to be, then it just would not be effective. You have to be anchoring rituals to time. So this is really next to the time of the temple in Jerusalem, the temple in Roman Judea. So this is a good illustration for us to start. If you look at the Jewish diaspora at the time, there was already a Jewish diaspora. So here is a small fragment of a sundial found in a synagogue in the island of Delos in the 2nd, maybe 4th, maybe 1st, probably 2nd century BCE. There was a synagogue in the island of Delos. Not sure, could be Professor Stern here, when maybe he would like to say more about that. Could be a Jewish or Samaritan synagogue in the island of Delos, and next to it there was a fragment of a sundial. Look at it. Can you see the lines of the sundial? Yeah. So we figured the sundials are somehow connected to synagogues in the Jewish diaspora. Look at this inscription from Hellenistic Egypt. As you know, there was a thriving Jewish community in Egypt, in many ways reminiscent of New York. Very thriving Jewish community in ancient Egypt. Scientists, philosophers, army leaders, legists, anybody. So look at that. It says Elazar, son of Nicolaus, the officer, on behalf of himself and Irene, his wife, set up the sundial and the well. So this is an inscription found next to a synagogue in Roman Egypt. So we have 2 examples from the Jewish diaspora outside Israel of sundials in the synagogue. Now, if you look at Roman Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, and the community, the rich neighborhood of Jerusalem, just next to it, the upper city of Jerusalem, I will show you now some sundials found in that area of Roman Jerusalem. This is a reconstruction of the Temple Mount. Just after it, to the top left, is where the city of the rich, the neighborhood of the rich priests of Jerusalem. And look what was found. So this little fragment, all of them were destroyed with the Roman destruction of Jerusalem. But this one was found just underneath the walls of the Temple Mount. So this one was probably there on the Temple Mount of Judea. They used that sundial for counting the time in the Temple of Judea. This is a fragment found in the sewage next to the temple, okay? Just recently. These are smaller sundials, but this one is a lot more accurate. And it's even complete. And look at the floral design. You see on the right, it's kind of a floral or geometric design. As we move forward, this is a nice one found now today in the museum at the University of Haifa. The gnomon, so that little nail up there, is not original. They added it later. But these are the way. And look at it. This is very small, but it's as small as the one we saw, the Egyptian one we saw just before. That's a very accurate sundial. Look at the lines, very nicely marked. The equinox line, if you mark the exact latitude of Jerusalem, I don't know how many mathematicians we have here, but if you do the math, this one is functioning very well also for specifically for the latitude of Jerusalem. That's very small. And in a way, it's very comparable to the Egyptian one found I've just shown before. This is the one I'd like to speak a bit more, and we're nearing the end of the lecture. So this is a very small one. You could hold it in the palm of your hand, something like that. Look how crude the lines are. This is a very inaccurate sundial. Why would somebody need that? I mean, look at that. I mean, it and the lines. I mean, it's even smaller, and the lines are so inaccurate, and they're very unnicely drawn, and the equinox line is winding its way through. It's very inaccurate. So why would somebody use it? It probably was not useful. I mean, you couldn't really tell if it's 3 or 4 or whatever or 5. It's very unuseful. So why would somebody use it? Could it be that this was just a sign of luxury or a sign of a symbolic? I mean, the thing is, I'm a priest. This was found in a priestly house. I am a priest. I have a sundial. I can count my time. I am timing my ritual activities by means of this object. It doesn't really mean that, objects are done by routine. You wake up in the morning, you do one after the other. They don't really need that. But what they did need they needed it to give away this sense of we are priests, we are counting our time, and time is measured, and we have mastery over the ritual time. But I want to look at the back. Look at the back side and the drawing, the ornament on the back side of this sundial. And of course, you recognize the menorah. Yes, the menorah, the lamp, very prominent Jewish symbols. However, I want to say two things. First of all, at that time, the menorah was still not the most prominent Jewish symbol. We have many drawings of the menorah from later Jewish iconography, but not from the actual time of the temple. This is actually one of the few drawings of the menorah from that time. There is another kind of graffiti in the Jewish quarter, actually in the neighborhood next to it, and maybe some other, but very few. It became a prominent Jewish symbol only later on. Think about the Roman objects we saw in the beginning. The drawings, the other iconography you had at the sundial. Yes, think about it. They had deities of time. They had Atlas. They had other deities. They had goddesses of time. And here is a Jewish priest saying, I will not put deities of time, but I will put my menorah. Why would he use the menorah of all objects? I mean, why did he put the menorah on an object of time? Well, first of all, one could say that the lamps of the menorah could really remind you actually of the drawing of the sundial. However, look at the way contemporary Jewish writers describe the menorah. And here is what Flavius Josephus has to say about the menorah. He says, spread itself into as many branches as there are planets, including the sun among them, terminated in 7 heads. Branches carried 7 lamps, one by one, in imitation of the number of the planets. So for people at the time in Jerusalem, the menorah actually was an astral symbol. And for them, the 7 lamps of the menorah actually was symbolic for the planets. And he's not the only writer saying that. We have other evidence of contemporary writers saying the same. So how interesting it is that this astral symbol of the menorah was drawn just on the back of this sundial, yes, as a symbol for saying, look, we have some contact with the natural forces. We can mind our time this way. So we are drawing menorah because we are priests who know how to handle menorah. Therefore, we know how to handle the planets and how to handle time. The last thing, okay, we can skip some of these. I guess we could. What time is it? Yeah, I think we should. The last thing I want to show is that precisely at that time, in the 1st century BC, you start seeing mentions of hours in the sources. So precisely at the time of those sundials that we found, you start seeing Flavius Josephus saying about the Essenes, doing some kind of work on the 5th hour of the day, and of course the Gospels, speaking about the crucifixion of Jesus. When the 6th hour had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And then the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloah, Eloah, lama sabachthani, these famous words that you all know. So this is really the time. Now, Jews were absorbing this element of time. It's not a typical Jewish time, actually. It's not a typical Jewish element. Would be counting Sabbaths and so on, but Jews were absorbing that. Jews actually were presenting some objection to other Roman elements, also other Roman elements of time. Jews never accepted the Roman calendar, but they very easily accepted the Roman counting of hours. They were very receptive to that. Actually, I can see why. It's very convenient, but it's also mattered, and it gives a sense of prestige and so on. But they accepted it wholesale. Therefore, you have these sources in Josephus, in the New Testament, in the Mishnah. So rabbinic literature, which was starting to be written just then, and rabbinic literature is obsessed with hours. Every little thing is counted with hours and halves of hours and quarters of hours. And even the sundial is mentioned once in the Mishnah. Long story. And I will finish the talk with this object. That's a bit earlier. It was found in Qumran, so maybe 1st century BCE. It does not resemble any sundial we know from any other place in the world. But people consider it to be a sundial because you can stick a gnome on like a stick in the middle. And I wrote an article about that. Then I said, it might be an ashtray. I find it very hard to explain, to consider this thing as a sundial. If it is I mean, for all I know about sundials, it just doesn't match any kind of sundial I can think about. If it could be anything, I could say there was one very unusual person in that site in Qumran next to the Dead Sea, where the Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls were, who had his own way of manipulating or experimenting with time, maybe, yes. And so he created this thing which really is absolutely creative and does not match anything else we know about time. That guy could have gone to the market and bought for a few shekels, could bought a little stone sundial like we saw up there. But if it is a sundial, then that guy did a completely creative new job about this object. So this is our first case study of encountering text and images. Tomorrow, there will be something completely different.
We have time for questions.
Thank you very much. Going back to your first case,
Yeah.
has anyone studied these in relation to the eye idols that proceeded by thousands of years and found only in one Mesopotamia area? The
So
shapes are the same?
could you say again the eye idols?
The eye idols. Are you familiar with the eye idols?
No, I'm not.
Oh, okay.
So I'm happy to hear about that. So how earlier are they?
I'm sorry, it's not fair for me to discuss it if you're not familiar with
Okay.
it. So it's okay.
Well, that's very kind of you, but I'm very happy to hear about that. And I can say that none of the discussion involves any of the eye idols before.
Hi, you mentioned the Roman calendar. Didn't this come from Egypt? Didn't this?
Yes, the Roman calendar is a way, an enumeration of some kind of reformed Egyptian year, 365 plus once every 4 years you add the 29th of September. So it's a reformed way of the Egyptian calendar, introduced by an Egyptian king in a non-successful way, but later, like a century later or 2 centuries later, adopted by the Romans and enacted through the empire by Caesar. The point is that Jews never accepted that Roman calendar. And in the rabbinic sources, you have very explicit polemic against it. The empire was very much invested in promoting that calendar, but Jews explicitly opposed it. However, with the hours, you just don't see, there's no polemic. Jews are not, as a matter of fact, they're just accepting it and integrating very strongly into their halakha, into the ritual system of Judaism that could be very elaborate, as you know, but there is no sign of resistance, which is interesting. Why? I mean, why this kind of time is good and that other kind of time is bad? It's a question for us. I mean, I could think of answers, but it's an interesting question. Yes. Please.
Hi, thank you for doing this. My question is, in all these studies, did you ever see anything about like pre or post diaspora about like Jewish purification, or like rules about like, oh, like, this time thing can only be used next to the temple? Like, did you encounter any like rules about how it should be used, or like who should use it exactly?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so interesting question. Look, there is not much talk about these kind of things before. They are introduced in the last century, or I would say centuries or century, just before the temple. And we have talks about timing the acts in the temple, like you saw, yeah, but not many of them. And it becomes obsessive only after the fall, after the destruction. And it becomes explicit only after the destruction. That's the point. Beforehand, all we can do is try to deduce on it from what we know from Egypt, for example. So the question is really a matter of acceptance. As I said, it's a new element that came in and absorbed, and adopted very warmly by Jews. But they only start being explicit about it like a century or two afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Yonatan. Wonderful, wonderful lecture. Going back to this first example, so from what you're telling us, if we only had the material record, we wouldn't know anything about ancient Judean ideas about a Sabbath until the post-biblical period. We would have information about a roughly 30-day period, about the Chodesh, the month.
Yeah.
And with this particular object that you have up there, we would also know about a 15-day unit.
Or like half a month.
Half of a month. Thinking about the possibility that in biblical Hebrew, the word Shabbat sometimes is parallel to Chodesh and seems to refer to the 15th day of the month, or in Leviticus chapter 23, Mimocharata Shabbat. Mm-hmm. Plausibly, this can mean from the day after the 15th day of the month. Do you think, I guess I have two questions. One, does this object perhaps support the idea that in the biblical period, the main way of dividing up time wasn't into a 7-day week, but was into Chodesh and Shabbat, that is to say, a unit that began with the Chodesh, and then 15 days later had a Shabbat? And how might you relate the absence of any 7-day peg information to the possibility that, let's say, even in priestly literature, we weren't usually dealing with a 7-day unit, but that it may not be until we get to holiness literature in the later part of the priestly literature that we first get the idea of a 7-day Shabbat, which is therefore a fairly late addition to Israelite culture, Judean culture. And here I'm thinking a little bit also of Israel Knoll's work that suggests that the number 7 isn't important in P. It only becomes important later on in the HS, in the Holiness School's documents.
So can I give you a material answer? Think about the month plans you have, like when you order an airplane ticket and you get that on the website. The weeks never tune into the months, right? Because the month is like a 30-day month or 31-day month, and the weeks they never correspond with full weeks. Yes, so weeks are crossing the units of the month. Yes, this is why the weeks are actually different. It's not very convenient. Think about it. If you want to handle your time in an efficient way, then handling your time in decades or fives would be a lot more convenient than handling them in weeks. Now, there's a theory which makes a lot of sense to me, that in early biblical times, actually the word Shabbat did not mean a 7-day week. It meant like its congener in Akkadian, Shapatum. Shapatum in Akkadian, same word, Shapatum, exact same word, means half a month, like full moon day. The day of full moon, half a month. And it actually makes a lot of sense that in the early biblical period, that was the actual meaning of Shabbat. What I can say that even when the concept of week was introduced, it was not introduced as a civil unit. It was used as a measure, as a means for constructing sacred time. But nobody ever thought of using it Like when you put shifts in the restaurant, who's doing Monday night, whatever. This only came a lot later. We have, from the later Roman period, we have contracts for selling fields from Engedi. In the contract of selling field, every field was sold with rights for irrigation. And the rights for irrigation were counted by the days of the week. So that field is sold together with 2.5 hours on Monday. Every Monday you get 2.5 hours of irrigation. But that's also, that's very late. And even if there was a weekly Shabbat in the biblical period, it was not, and I think quite clear, it was not an administrative time.
Yeah. Does the pegboard with 30 holes suggest that the solar calendar was dominant?
30 days is not clearly solar either. 30 days is schematic. I mean, first of all, there is no such thing as a solar month. It's an oxymoron, you know. The sun gives the year, it does not give months. So 30 days is a scheme, really. I can speak a lot about the solar calendar, but that might be, and I've been look it up. I wrote a lot about that.
Deborah, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you. This is really fascinating. I just was following up on this, the distinction you made earlier on about the civil time versus administrative time, and that the schematic idea. So the idea of the 7-day week is something that's religious or sacred that becomes imposed on top of, so it kind of wins out over administrative time at a certain point. And if that's the case, any idea when that happens or why?
Yeah. So I was trying to discuss that with my friend Professor Sommer here. In the beginning, it just didn't occur to anybody that they should use that unit of 7 in their day-to-day time reckoning. It just doesn't make sense. It's not convenient. You could, and I guess in contracts they would just write the day of the month. On the third month, day 14, whatever. That's it, and they never. But the point is, at some stage, that unit of sacred time got hold onto everyday life. And think about it. Today, we cannot imagine ourselves assigning shifts in the restaurant without days of the week. But that took time to depart. It took time to crystallize. It took time for that sacred unit to gain hold of with everyday time. And I guess, so what you have in this material culture is before that stage. And why that thing took place, yes, maybe you should ask some people here.
Well, I mean, is it a mathematical issue? It's much more complicated to construct a time based on 7 as opposed to 10. So is it and also a mathematical understanding, of an astral understanding of the stars and the, is it lunar versus solar? I mean, does it have to do with a scientific projection as opposed to something that's just convenient?
So the point is, you're absolutely right. It has nothing to do with nature. The unit of 7 days, there's no natural correspondence. It's not like there's no, like quarter lunar month maybe, but that doesn't really count for 7 days. So absolutely, it does not count to anything in nature. There is something I can tell you that would be a topic for a different light. But at some stage in Second Temple Judea, there was a group, like a sectarian group, that said, look, so that would be like the end of the process you're suggesting. So they said, look, if the Sabbath is the most typical way of constructing Jewish time, why don't we construct a complete year that would be made of Sabbaths, only of Sabbaths? So forget about reality, forget about the sun, forget about the moon. We don't care so much about reality. It was an apocalyptic group. Yes, the group from Qumran. They said, we don't care so much about the sun, whatever. Let's put together a year of 364 days. You can do the math yourself. It divides nicely into 7. And they said, forget about nature. We will do our year that's made of Sabbaths. And they would define the year as the number of weeks in the year. And so that kind of calculation says, farewell to nature. It's the holy, sacred time that we care about. Yeah.
Is there any references in the documents that says that a week is actually 10 days?
They don't use the word week, but in ancient Egypt, for example, the standard dating formula would be a decade. Also in Athens, like in classical Greece, they would count the days of the month by decades. So they would say in the third decade, the fourth day in the third decade. That's the way they would count it. Yeah, that's a lot of attestation to that. Yes, please.
I have a very practical question, please, and that is,
It's a very practical object, so yes.
yes, I agree. How would this be used? Does it have some sticks? Does it have some little stones? How is this identified when it's being used in that moment? Because it's going to be changed, I guess, the next day. They get moved around, or do those one of them represent, like the ones on the top three? Do those become a 10 amount of 10 as opposed to an amount of 1? How are these used?
The top three are a nice question. Look, how are these used? That's a good question. We don't have anything that survived. So, or get if they had a matchstick or anything, like the peg itself did not survive. So we don't know. The top three is an interesting question. Does it mean anything in terms of the year? So some people thought about the Egyptian year. Actually, the Egyptian year had 3 seasons. The Egyptian year had 3 seasons, not 4. And there was this idea that this could maybe relate to the 3 seasons of the Egyptian year. The Egyptian year had 3 seasons of 4 months each. So you have the 3 seasons, but you don't have the 4 months each of the seasons. So I'm not really sure about this. This could just be for suspension. The top 3 lines. I mean, if somebody, it could be like somebody suspended, like wore it as a necklace.
Yeah, because there's the other one that has like a little triangle out of it, and I'm wondering, so how? And that was on the top, and I'm thinking like, so how do you hold it if you're going to lay it down on the desk, or you're going to put it on the floor, or you're going to hold it in your hand and do your phone?
Actually, I want to say something about that tomorrow. The desks were not yet invented. The desk was not yet invented. Scribes and administrators wrote like this. Yeah, or sitting down. I have a nice illustration of that tomorrow. But the desk, it wasn't fastened to a desk. I guess it was. I think it was worn. I think it was worn as a necklace, or maybe like a very personal object, very close to that person's chest. Please.
So my question is, Ben, how do you deal with Bereshit? How do you deal with that? It says Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni.
Yeah. So of course, I'm not denying that. I'm saying, but Bereshit gives you a sacred time unit. Genesis chapter 1, Bereshit. It says that the world was created in 7 days and that God was running the way he counted his time in 7 days. Fine, but that doesn't mean that people use that unit of 7 days for dating contracts or for signing shifts in the, So for us, it's natural that we read Book of Genesis and that it means what we know about the week. But what I tried to show now, that this kind of thing took a while. In the first centuries of the Sabbath, it was only a sacred unit of time, but not a civil unit of time. I could, but fortunately, that's not the topic of my talk today.
So, just to go to the hours for the Mishnah you were referencing, the beginning of the Mishnah is not referring to time and hours, and the end of it is. Is that reflecting a chronological disparity in when clocks or when sundials were accepted, or societal distinction, or what?
You mean tractate Brachot at the beginning and tractate, what is it?
No,
Yadayim at
no.
the end?
In the Mishnah you cite, in the beginning of that Mishnah,
Okay.
they refer to time experientially, and at the end of the Mishnah they say hours.
Yeah. We can have a closer look at that text from the Mishnah.
Yeah, so
That's
first
interesting.
it's what you can see, and
This is the very beginning of this entire legal code, huge, gigantic legal code. That's the very beginning. Actually, this is not the very, it's the second paragraph. At what time one can start reciting Shema? So that's a kind of prayer. In the morning, the first thing is when you can tell the difference between light blue and white. Yeah, what hour does that occur? Yeah, dawn. Sometime in dawn, yeah. Or Rabbi Eliezer says between light and blue turquoise. And then Rabbi Yeshua says, it's about the time of finishing reciting Shema until the third hour, since princes wake up in the third hour. These are seasonal hours. So every day is divided into 12, regardless of the season. So hours in the winter will be a lot shorter than hours in the summer. Also depends on the latitude, geographical latitude where you live. But you see, so one of the sages is using a timed, like a numbered time, while the others use a natural indication. These people were more or less the same generation. Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Eliezer, they were more or less the same generation, but one could really, we need to look at, the Tosefta and other rabbinic sources and see whether we can say more about the layering of these. It could be, two things could be. First of all, it could be that an earlier, that like it's a relic of an earlier time when times were told not with hours. But it could also be exactly the same. Now, the point is also, look, the starting reciting the Shema, that's the very beginning of the day. There is still no shadow on the sundial. It's the very beginning. It doesn't even start.
But it's also agricultural and princely, so it's also class distinction.
Yeah.
Nature
and culture. That's beautiful. Yes. So next to the practical explanation, that's the difference between the very beginning of the day and the third hour where there's actually something to measure. But it's a cultural statement here. It's also a cultural statement here about the difference between, using light as a source and princes and absolutely. I wish I answered that. I said something.
I hope you'll all join us tomorrow and the next night to continue this conversation. But for now, please join me in thanking Jonathan Ben-Dov.